Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator, and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of DEI After 5. So if you know anything about me, you know that I am always going to say, speak up for yourself and, do the things that you need to do to let people know what you're thinking or what you want or what you need. But it's not always that easy. And so today we're going to have a conversation about self-advocacy in the workplace. And my guest is Shailvi Wakhlu, who is a consultant in this space, but also someone who is a huge advocate for self-advocacy. So Shailvi, welcome to the show today.
Hi, Sacha. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
So for folks that may not know who you are, can you just give us a little bit of your background and how you got into this work?
Yeah, so I am a speaker, author, and consultant. I recently published my book on self-advocacy, how to get what you deserve at work. And the frameworks and learnings that I share in the book have been developed over the last 4 years. I have mentored and coached over 300 people. I have spoken about this topic at conferences with corporations. And it's a topic that I care about a lot. As someone who was underrepresented and worked in the tech industry for a very long time, I myself had struggles with self-advocacy that I eventually overcame, and I tried to put it down in reusable frameworks.
I love it. So, you said something just now that I'm going to hone in right on, right? So had issues with self-advocacy, but we're able to overcome that. Can you talk to us a little bit about what was that point that made you realize you're like, you know what, I need to do this differently?
Yeah, it's a great point, because even now I think about it in a way that there's no definition of done, that okay, done with self-advocacy and now I have mastered that art permanently. I rather think of it as a journey, that when situations arise where you either feel that I could have proactively advocated for myself, I could have positioned myself in a positive way that would have made it easier for people to understand my value. Did I do that? Or in a reactive way, that, okay, a situation came up which wasn't really in my best interest. Was I able to turn that situation, at least make an attempt to try to turn that situation in something that benefits me? So I think for me, I feel like it's a continuous journey. There's no end point. You just keep trying to get better. You just keep learning, and you keep iterating on what you know and what you want to try next time to get the results that you want from it.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, that last piece of what you said, right? The wanting to know what you want to get out of it. Because I think so often we feel like, okay, well, I want to speak up, I want to say something, but we don't know what to ask for, or we don't even know what we want.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of work that needs to happen kind of to get to that point of, okay, well, what is it that I want? What do I out of this situation, or, whatever it is. So, talk to us a little bit about how you even get to that piece of the puzzle, because I think that's such a critical foundational part.
So I think honing in on what are your career values, what is it that actually you want out of your job? Is it, of course, everybody wants money for sure, but maybe it's a threshold, maybe it's something you want to maximize. Do you want to have a lot of influence? Do you want to work on cool things, have interesting challenges? I think honing down on those pieces, which help you understand what is it that I'm trying to get out of my career anyways, and then taking stock of that and saying that, okay, if I wanted continuous growth, or if I wanted continuous learning or achievement, or that feeling that people really value me and that they care about what I have to say, am I actually hitting those goals? Or do I just sort of sit back and see that, okay, I see other people getting what I want, and why am I not able to get it? I think that is the piece that is usually that trigger point for a lot of people, where they feel that I know this is what I want out of my career. I know I have the capacity to get it. I'm not different from anybody else who's able to get it. So what is stopping me from getting those outcomes that I really want to optimize for?
Yeah. As you were speaking, what came to me was, if someone says, I want a promotion,
Mm-hmm.
the coach in me is saying, what makes that important to you? Because is it for growth in your career, or are you wanting this promotion because you want the money that comes along with that promotion?
Yeah.
Right. So if it's the money, then that's a different conversation than your career path that you want to take. And so when you're talking about advocacy in this way, it really is honing in on the why behind a lot of the what.
100%. And I think the promotion one is in a special, at least for me, it was, I love to tell this story to people that I had multiple jobs where within, say, a couple of months after joining, I was promoted. And I looked at that as a great thing. I was like, yes, they see my value. And in a very short time, I'm able to showcase that, and I get a promotion. And later I realized that maybe there was a different spin to it, that I hadn't actually showcased that value while I was interviewing. So I was underleveled when I came in. Then I showed up on the job and did something different. But it really made me, and it's not a negative thing, but it's more of that, why am I not showing that value at the time of interviewing? If I'm good enough to be promoted 3 months after starting a job, maybe I should have entered at that level in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great example, because for so often I think we're focused on, I just want to get the job.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, is this the job meeting me at a place where I can bring value and continue to exceed? Or is it just my way of getting in the door? And again, it goes back to that why of the what. So, as I talk about advocacy and we talk about values, and values is such a critical part of this because it drives who we are and what we expect, right? And so for someone who is in the workplace that knows what they want, but they just feel like they don't have the voice to be able to ask, like, what are some things that they can do to start to build some confidence in those vocal skills?
Yeah, that's a great topic. And I think, it's so interesting. I worked in technology for 16 years, and it's so interesting that people, when very early on in my career, said like, "Oh, you're in technology, you're an engineer, you don't need strong communication skills. That's not required." I've never disagreed with anything more. I think communication is a part of every single job. Academics have to talk about their work. Technologists have to talk about their work. Everybody does. And so for me, I think, so as I mentioned earlier, I mentored a lot of people over the last few years. And one of the most common themes that came up was that people didn't know when to speak up. So, how do you sort of do it proactively? They're like, what is the appropriate forum where I should be talking about my work? Or, do I always have to go tap someone on the shoulder and be like, hey, did you see what I did? So it's an odd thing for people to sort of figure out. And I always tell people, like, I think everybody on their self-advocacy journey may be at a different stage. So you have to sort of first have that awareness yourself, that where are you? Have you reached the stage where you are comfortable at least talking to your manager? Does your manager understand what it is that you do? Do your immediate teammates? So does your team understand how you add value and how you are raising the bar for the team's output? And then start going outwards. Do people in other departments understand that? Does someone 2 levels above you understand that? And I think that's a way to sort of almost work your way up. That start with those weekly conversations that you have with your manager. A lot of managers are great at creating the right prompts so that their reports actively share what interesting things they're working on, what challenges they faced, what they even need. self-advocacy is not just about saying what you did well, it's also asking for what you need so that you can do your job well. So some managers are great at it. They structure the prompts in a way that helps people think about it and respond to those prompts. But others, maybe it's not intentional, but maybe they don't structure the prompts, and they just say something simple like, what do you want to talk about today? And that's a pretty wide, vague prompt. But I would say that people should think about it themselves. What should your manager know about your work, about the challenges you face, about what you would have in terms of preferences, that benefits your career? And how do you start practicing saying those things? If you have to praise yourself, if you have to talk about a project in a positive way, how can you practice it in a way that sounds authentic? It's in your voice, but it gets the point across that you are valuable, you are doing something that's unique, that's challenging, and that you're able to actually deliver results.
So, it really is about this self-advocacy on all levels, right? It's not just about when it's time for promotion or when it's time for, moving to another project. It is ongoing. And that's probably a good way to practice as well, too.
100%. I think the daily practice that people can do even on their own, that actually just start writing down the things that you're doing that you're proud of. So it's a good way to even recap your day. It's a great way to recap your week, but start actually structuring that this is what I achieved this week. This is why it's important to the business. And that helps you create that documentation for yourself to be able to evaluate what are the things that I'm doing well, and how can I make sure that other people who should ideally know about these things know about that.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I was working with an organization last week, and they were talking about, some layoffs that had happened in the organization. And one of the people that was laid off was such a critical part of the work that they were doing with customers. But it seemed like nobody in leadership knew that. And so when they laid this person off, they didn't see, this as a valuable part of the business. But come to find out, this person was basically the linchpin for a lot of the work that they were doing. And what came across to me was, like with the organization, the folks that were in the organization were saying, what, this is someone that is so valuable and they let them off, do we have a job? But what struck me was this person advocating for themselves? Like, did people know how much work that they were doing, right? Did their manager know what was going on, or the connection they were having to clients? Because oftentimes, unless it's a sales position or, something that's externally facing that's being measured, it's very difficult for organizations to see some of that behind the scenes work. And so, how do you then advocate? And that was my first, thought was, okay, this person probably just kind of did the work, and the folks that were closest to them and doing the work or getting the work done knew, but leadership didn't know. Yeah. And so, that's kind of the downfall when you aren't doing those weekly check-ins, or you aren't necessarily sharing, okay, these are the things that I'm working on this week. These are the goals that I'm trying to reach. This is what I was able to accomplish last week. These are the folks that I've worked with, because those things do matter. They absolutely matter when it comes to what we're starting to see in a lot of organizations with these rifts and, layoffs and everything else that's taken place.
I absolutely loved, specifically that you also called out that when people can't see that dollar conversion, sales teams, it's easy to see that, but it's so important. So one of in my career, there was this one team that I was brought in to manage, and they were pretty unhappy. They felt very undervalued. They said, we're always stuck with all this last minute work and people don't seem to value us. And one of the simplest changes that I made, I think in week 2 of managing them, was that when we gave our weekly updates, which was to the entire engineering leadership team, I attached a dollar number to the work that they were doing. And in that case, it was easy to pull up because they were working on things that were in support of a deal that could be closed. So I said, okay, this work that they did, it affected $3 million worth of deals, and suddenly everybody's perception totally changed. And unfortunately, it's not easy to tie that in sometimes. Like, I think we got lucky in that case, but there is a way, like, if you actually think about it and figure out how do you follow the dollars. people really find that valuable. And when they know that they can either make money through the work that you're doing or save money through the work you're doing, that really helps people put your work in perspective. And I also, especially, I always remind people to not frame the work that they do as help. You're not helping a team out, you are doing your job. That job has a business need, there's a business requirement, and the business benefits when you do it. You're not helping anybody out, you're not doing charity here, you're doing something that helps the business make money.
That's a whole other conversation we can have, because there's certain key words right now that I'm out of corporate, but I'm seeing this from a different perspective. But help is one, support is another, right? You have to shift some of those words to truly position yourself as a vital part of the work, because that is your job, right? That is what you are doing. And I love that dollar amount sign, because I was 10 years in tech as well, in marketing. And, I've had someone say, well, marketing's job is to make things look pretty. Right. If it wasn't for marketing, no one would know about you. Right. So to bring you into the business to make the sale. And so what I started to do was look at the sales teams that I was supporting, but I wouldn't put that on my resume, but that I was supporting, and talk and really look at the deals. This person or this organization came to this event that we sponsored, right? And then tie that into, and just kind of follow the money, as you said. And we closed the $8 million deal or a $10 million deal, right? Because of this one event that brought them in. And being able to really advocate for the work in that way positioned me in a different way when I was doing this for a small, startup. So now I'm being placed on national, programs and events, or partner events, and on a global capacity, because I was able to do the work. And so really helping to figure out the best way to position yourself. Like, how do you bring your resume to life every single day? Okay. So what if someone feels, I get it, I advocate for myself, but it blows up in my face, right? I'm being told that I'm aggressive, or all of these negative connotations. How does somebody navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful call out. I think, especially as women of color, it's something that we have to think about. It's not sorry. It's not, the chance is not zero that people don't have a negative reaction to what you're trying to say. And so I do think it helps to think about that. But I would say that what my advice to people would be that think about the situation where you want to advocate for yourself, and really play out, like, what is the worst that can happen. And that's not in isolation, it's also dependent on the people in the situation. Are you talking to your manager? Do you typically understand what your manager, how they react to various questions, to various comments? And yes, sometimes people have to phrase their self-advocacy, they have to soften it in a way that is more palatable. And that's something that you learn along the way. I do say that I'll say two pieces about this. One is that even if the worst scenario happens, that maybe you thought you would not have such a negative reaction, and you did. Honestly, now now you know how that particular person reacts to it, or now you know how that message tends to land, and it's still a learning. Next time you're going to try something different. Either it's going to be with a different person, or you're going to use a different language, you're going to use a different thing. And yes, I completely agree that it is unfair that sometimes even the most polite but firm message is, it gets that aggressive label. It's super unfair. but there are always ways to, if that is the reality, then you have to figure out how else you can frame it. So I was giving somebody this example recently where they said, hey, what if I ask for a promotion and they react negatively and say, how dare you bring up that you want to get promoted? And I said, well, one way is you don't ask for a promotion. You ask for, what would it take for me to continue showing growth on my path so that I can get promoted. That's a very different positioning. It's a very different way of framing things. And people, like, if somebody has a negative reaction even to you asking how you can improve, how you can grow, how you can learn the skills that are required for your growth, then honestly, that's good to know.
That might not be the place for you.
It really might not. So, either ways, you learn something about the message, you learn something about the person, you learn something about the situation. And sometimes the magical thing that happens is that you ask and you have a very positive reaction. People say, like, oh, great, like, you brought it up at the right time. I'm just going into performance management season, so this is the right time for us to be talking about it. So you never know, unless you ask, you'll never hear what the answer is and how you could have phrased it in a way that you would have got what you wanted.
Yeah. And, I think it's so important too. I'm glad that you brought up like the performance season. It's also understanding and knowing the culture of the organization, because I think there's so many, especially younger generations, that feel, okay, I've been in this job for 2 to 3 years, then I need to get promoted. And that might not necessarily be the culture of that organization, or that might not be their process, right? They may have some other things that you will need to do in order for a promotion to be put on the table. So it's understanding also, okay, so what are the criteria? What are the things that I need to know and understand about this organization before I advocate for promotion? Because you also don't want to advocate in ignorance, if that makes sense,
Yes.
right? You don't want to advocate and not having done your research or not understanding, okay, this is how this place operates. And so I'm going to advocate for this over here, which may be a stepping stone to what you want. And so that positioning is the politicking of it all. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but that's also part of the process, because now what people are seeing, especially leaders, okay, so they understand how we operate.
100%. I almost encourage people to, so in my book, I actually have a little worksheet that I encourage people to fill out, which is, figure out what the status quo is. Does your company have fixed promotion cycles? Is it a rolling thing? What do peers in your position look like? When did they get a promotion? All of that helps. And back to that first topic that we were talking about, that self-awareness of what do you want out of it anyways. Is it the title that's important to you? Is it the money? Is it just the recognition?
Yeah. The other thing I thought about too with this, and again, I'm kind of going back in my career and things that I, was able to do or work around barriers that were in my way, was like I had this one particular VP that I was working with that was very just focused on, like, let's just get the job done and not necessarily development of the team. And so my workaround and my advocacy was working with our chief technology officer, working with a VP in another department, like I was positioning myself with other senior leaders so that they saw value and that they were speaking my name in rooms when I wasn't there. And when my skip level wasn't saying my name, like somebody else was saying my name. And so that then got me positioned where I was having regular conversations with our CEO. Right. I got pulled into some other projects that he was working on. And so it was understanding, okay, if you hit one wall, how can you advocate for yourself in other ways? And how can you use other people to kind of be your voice when you're not at the table? And so that's part of that as well, too. And, for me, I was the only at that time. No, I wasn't the only. I was the first woman of color, first Black woman that this company had hired. But by this time, there were a couple of others in the organization. And so there was some learning that had to happen there as well too, with, oh, she's not aggressive, like, but she's very passionate and very direct in things that she's saying. But I had to have some of these other leaders say that, because my leader would have been, oh, she's aggressive and all those things. So part of that advocacy for me really was like, okay, who's my champion? Or like, who's the other people? Who are the other people that I can tap into, can lean into, to help me get from point A to point B? And it actually was one of those VPs that sat down and asked me, okay, Sacha, what is it that you want? Right? If you could write out the ideal job for yourself, what would it be? And I sat down and I wrote out the ideal job. And he was very honest. He was like, it's not here. This job is not here. However, I'll help you build the skills that you need in order to get
wherever you that is something that I absolutely love. Like I feel like leaders who are transparent about that this opportunity does not exist for you here, but here's what you can get out of this job that helps you for your next thing. I think those are the relationships that last beyond the fact that you worked in the same place. And I also love that phrasing of making sure that at least your passion is clear. And especially when you phrase it as that this is not just something that I am advocating for myself, but it actually helps you as a company manage your talent better for everybody else who's in the situation. That, hey, people in this team tend to get not seen, their work doesn't tend to get valued, or people who are from a certain demographic tend to suffer the same thing. And yes, it's a problem I have, but I know that 5 other people have the same problem. And I am putting in the work to bring to your attention a problem that many people face. And this ultimately helps you as a company, because now you can address it for everyone, and not just the few people who don't mind putting their neck out there and bringing it up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was a great point that you point out. Advocacy doesn't always have to be self-advocacy, right? It could be for a community. It could be for, a group within the organization as well. And I think some of the same tenets apply with, making sure that your voice is heard and the things that you want are very clear, and, all of those things. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of a pivot.
Okay.
Talk to me about like the things that you do to take care of yourself. Like what do you do to fill your cup?
I take a lot of intentional time to just express gratitude. It's something that I feel puts me in the right mode, and gratitude for on both sides. Like, one is expressing gratitude to myself for things that I'm doing intentionally that make me feel better. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I try to thank the universe for putting the right things in my path that I'm very happy to see. But lastly, I make sure to thank and appreciate the people in my life who are contributing to me in a valuable way, who are helping me out with things that I am struggling with. I think that reminder that I value somebody, I appreciate their help, and that their presence in my life is meaningful is very important to do. It is an act of self-care as well, because I feel better after I have acknowledged all the things that are going well and acknowledge the people who help make those things happen.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. So Shailvi, if folks wanted to follow you, connect with you, what are some ways that they can do that?
Yes. So my website is just shailvi.com. It's my first name.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. I should be pretty easy to find, so people can follow me there. And I do tend to post a lot of resources about self-advocacy and a lot of other connected topics. My email is just shailvi@shailvi.com. And lastly, my book is available for purchase on Amazon.
Wonderful. Shailvi, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this topic, because I think so many people struggle with kind of what to do or even if it's something that they can do. And I believe it's something everyone absolutely can do. It's just having the right tools and the right game plan in place. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all for tuning in to this week's episode. I hope you were able to walk away with one or two things that you could at least noodle on, think about when it comes to self-advocacy in the workplace, or, even in life, right? All of these things apply in life as well. So be sure to like, subscribe, share. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you find your podcast every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. And until next time, have a good one.